Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Now it's time to get into actually compositing something, putting a couple of images together inside of Fusion. Let's go back to the edit page, and we're going to go to this first shot, VFX House EXT. And to bring this into Fusion, all we have to do is have our playhead over the shot, and then just click on the Fusion page. And now that will bring the shot into Fusion. Just like before, we have our media in, that's our original footage, and our media out, which goes out to the timeline. In fact, to make things a little bit nicer, let's rename our nodes. If I select a node and hit F2 on the keyboard, that will let us rename it. And so we'll call this house shot. And then I'll say _MI for media in. It's always good to have some indication of what the node actually is in your name. I like to do underscore initials. You can do it however you want. So house shot MI. I'll hit OK, and we'll just leave media out because media out is the only thing it does is media out. So now we have our house shot. Let's make some fog to put over this shot. There are a bunch of different ways to do that. You can get a fog image from the internet, or you can shoot one yourself, whatever. But there's actually a really cool effect inside of Fusion that makes foggy cloud things. And that's the second icon over here, fast noise. So let's grab this and drag it down, not in between anything, but just right here. And this is what's going to generate our fog for us. Now, before we get into that, I told you that we'd come back to talk about these viewers. Well, each of these viewers is set to look at a specific node. Right now, the second viewer is previewing our media out 1. The reason I know that is because 1, it says right up here, media out 1. And also, if we look down in our nodes, there are these little dots, and the right dot is white. That means that this is loaded in the right viewer. If I were to go down here and click on the left dot so that it's white, it would be loaded in both viewers. The reason they do it this way is that sometimes you want to just view one part of your composition before it hits other nodes. You want to preview what you're doing. Just like we might grab a piece of media and view it in our source viewer here in the edit page, we're doing kind of a similar thing in the Fusion page. We're really just picking up a node and looking at it. So this fast noise node, I could go over here and say, load that into the left viewer. And now we see what's happening with our fast noise. Now, this is what kind of gets people in trouble. You can be looking at one of your viewers, but it's not actually connected to our composite. And so I might say, wow, that fog looks really good. And then I go back to the edit and there's no fog at all. So it does have to be connected to media out to actually render out to the timeline, but you can take a look at any node in your composition by enabling it in one of the viewers. A quick way to do this, instead of going and clicking these little dots, is to hit 1 or 2 on the keyboard. If you hit 1, it toggles the left viewer, 2 toggles the right viewer. What I like to do is keep my media out in my right-hand viewer. And if I want to preview any of my nodes, I load that in the left viewer. The reason I do it this way is because it's a lot like the edit page, right? The right-hand viewer in the edit page is your timeline viewer, which is what you're actually going to see. The left-hand viewer isn't necessarily what you're going to see, it's just previewing stuff. So we can kind of take that same idea here into the Fusion page, even though you have the freedom to kind of do whatever you want. So with my fast noise loaded in my first viewer, with it selected, I can go to the inspector and adjust all of these different controls. Like I can push up the detail and push up the scale, and that just changes how our fog looks. So now we have our 2 ingredients, right? We have our house and we have our fog. In fact, let's rename this fog _FN for fast noise. So how do we put the fog over this shot? Well, Fusion doesn't really have any layers or anything like that. What we have to do is use a special node called a merge node. You can find a merge node just to the right of this second divider. And if we drag this in and take a look, it looks just like a regular node, except for there is a yellow input and a green input. And if you mouse over any of these, they'll tell you what they are. So yellow is the background and green is the foreground. So just like an effect node, we can put our house shot into the background and nothing really changes because all we're really telling it to do is grab the house shot, merge the foreground over it, which at this point is nothing, and then render it out. And that's what we're doing. So let's take the output from our fog and plug it into our foreground and look what happens. Now we have the fog in front of our house. Pretty cool. And here's the cool thing. If you've been following along with me and you put this fog over the house, you just did your first composite in Fusion. Say what? That's awesome. You put something over something else. That's the basics of compositing. So cool. Now we can take our merge node and put it over here, and we're starting to build our little recipe flowchart. Now, this merge node, if we select it, there are all these different properties for our merge node here in the inspector. One of them to pay attention to is this one called blend. Blend is like the opacity or the transparency of the foreground. And so if we take this down, we can kind of fade this on or off. So maybe we'll take this down a little bit, and now it just looks a little bit foggy. We can always preview what a node is doing by turning on or off its little switch here. Now we're adding that fog. Pretty cool. So now let's say, okay, we want to color correct this. We can go to our toolbar, grab our color corrector, and drag this down in between our merge and our media out. And now we can do something like bring down our brightness, bring down our contrast a little, and maybe turn this kind of blue. And now we're getting more of kind of a foggy nighttime feel. Now let's say we want to zoom in on this a little bit. We can use a transform node, which is this one sort of in the middle. Grab this and drag that in between our color corrector and our media out and shake it, make sure it's actually there. And then we can just pump up the size a little bit. Can even adjust the center maybe. And now we've zoomed it in. And so that's really what you do, is to put something over something else, you use the merge, and then you kind of chain these different nodes together to get what you want. And the order of these matters depending on what you're doing. For instance, right now what we're getting is everything color corrected and everything zoomed in. But if we were to take the color corrector, I'll hold shift and drag this in between our house and our merge, we're going to color correct the house before we put the white fog on top of it. So now we have the background color corrected, but the white fog isn't color corrected. We could also do the opposite. Color correct the fog before we put it over the house, and that has a different effect too. We could grab the transform and transform the fog before we put it over our house. We could even zoom this out just so that it looks really fake, and we could see the edges of our fog effect. So you can kind of make up your own order, but it does matter depending on what you're doing. I'll just hold shift and put this back. And now everything's zoomed out. Let's go ahead and reset that and maybe zoom it in just a little. So that's a basic composite inside of Fusion.